Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for October 1st, 2020, recorded around 4:15 p.m. Eastern Time. While taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic right now, things are starting to pick back up once again after a brief lull. And we can start to see we do have Invest Area 91L located in the southwestern Caribbean starting to become better organized today and does pose a threat over the next several days to the Yucatan Peninsula and the western part of Cuba as this moves slowly off towards the west-northwest. And then we also have an additional tropical wave near the Lesser Antilles with an increased shower and thunderstorm risk right now for portions of the Lesser Antilles. This will also be moving off towards the west-northwest over the next few days and poses a threat for the Caribbean once again, as this also has a shot at developing over the next several days. And then we also have the stalled frontal boundary located from the northeast United States and off the Canadian maritime coastline all the way down through Florida and the basically in through the Bay of Campeche. And this will kind of be a stalled front over the next several days. So this is going to provide a focusing for showers and thunderstorms across Florida, which could bring a heavy rainfall and flooding concern. So we can see these two players here, these two tropical waves on the Hurricane Center outlook. Again, Invest Area 91L with a 70% chance of developing over the next 5 days. This is a very tricky forecast because we're relatively uncertain if this is going to even stay over water for a long enough period of time. There is some concern or some hints that this may actually travel over the Yucatan Peninsula and kind of move out, and then upper level conditions would be unfavorable in the Bay of Campeche by the time this gets over to there. But if this manages to sneak a little bit northward and get better organized, this does have a chance to then organize a little bit down here in the Gulf, or in the Yucatan Channel, but conditions will still be relatively unfavorable, as I'll talk about there in a moment. And then obviously we have this other tropical wave approaching the Lesser Antilles, which does pose a threat down the road for heavy rainfall concerns for Jamaica and once again potentially the Yucatan Peninsula and the western portions of Cuba. So if we take a look here at the 850 vorticity, this is the spin in the atmosphere at about 5,000 feet off the ground. That's the 850 millibar layer in the atmosphere. And what you're really looking for is these reds and whites at your higher cyclonic spin as you go up in the scale. And you're not really seeing that here. You have an area of vorticity, but it's relatively stretched out. It's not bundled like you could kind of see right here. That's a little bit of bundling energy, nothing too significant over obviously the Dominican Republic and Hispaniola, but you don't really see that happening here. What you see instead is an elongated area of energy, and this is just kind of an open wave of energy right now moving west-northwest, and that's going to be the general case through the next several days. And at what point and where does this consolidate is going to become the biggest question here, because if we do get a northern lobe to end up developing and consolidating, we'll start to see this move a little bit further towards the north and get maybe tugged a little bit more by this front right here. Or if this is further south, this front doesn't have as much of an influence, and this gets tugged further into the Yucatan Peninsula over land and doesn't pose much of a threat at all once this gets over water, if at all. So there's a lot of considerable uncertainties here and a lot of things that are going to be playing into the eventual evolution of how 91L actually kind of shapes out to be. Now, the one thing that we do have going for the storm is the relative high upper ocean heat content values. And we can see that everywhere within this red color here, this is very high upper ocean heat content values in the upper part of the scale at 150 to 200, basically joules per kilogram, I do believe. And we can see that this is an absurdly high amount down here. And we typically see these values for this time of the year in the Caribbean where the most warmth has built up. We haven't really had anything to disturb the water down in this vicinity. You can see a relative cold wake that we actually have associated with the upwelling from Hurricane Laura, Sally, Marco. In this general vicinity, that's that cooler water in through here that we can see. But otherwise than that, we have a very warm Caribbean, and up near Florida and the Bahamas, it's also very warm. So this area certainly has more than enough heat energy to kind of take, for a system to take advantage of. And that's what we're trying to see is if something can develop quicker, and if so, it has a little bit more time in a generally favorable environment to kind of be taken advantage of with those very high upper ocean heat content values. And the sea surface temperatures in that region, you can see, are literally running off the charts. Basically, everywhere in this dark red is about 31 degrees Celsius, and our invest area is right here, this little eye. And this is sitting within a relatively warm area. I mean, 31 degrees Celsius waters, very high upper ocean heat content in the upper end of the scale. This can certainly take advantage of the warmer waters if this decides to get going anytime soon. It will have to face some obstacles, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But for the most part, this area does seem to be pretty favorable, especially when we talk about the sea surface temperature profile. Now, one thing that the storm or the system is going to have to deal with is it is going to be contending with some very dry mid-level air associated with this cold front. And you can see this was from about 8 o'clock this morning at 12Z. The cold front right now is positioned across South Florida and kind of moving like that. So our cold front right now is positioned roughly from portions of eastern Mexico through the southern Bay of Campeche, or the northern part of the Bay of Campeche, southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And also, we have it located over across Florida. And that is very interesting because we can see kind of the change in the air mass from a relative moist air mass from South Florida here to the relatively dry continental air coming off from the passage of this cold front. And these two are trying to kind of work in tandem to kind of help and to go against formation of a tropical cyclone in this environment. So it's very important to kind of understand the relative uncertainty that we have going forward here. And we can really see that in the model forecast, this is the next 24 hours, this relative dry air mass does have a problem getting entrained. And again, that's because we have a stalled front in through here, and this front is not going to allow anything to move in. And what that is ending up doing is it's causing more and more of this dry air to get pushed around. But eventually what ends up happening is we end up kind of getting a retrieve, kind of this system to, the cold front rather, to start to abate. But as it does so, now it doesn't have as much dry or as much moist air to work with because this front is kind of getting distorted. And as such, we now start to see this dry air be wrapped around into any circulation that is developing on the northern end here near the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. And we can really see that it really disrupts any system trying to get going here. All this mid-level dry air from this front, and our front is still kind of positioned up and through this region. That's our front. But you also notice what is happening away from the storm. We go back to earlier where we had kind of this moisture pocket. This is September 30th. So this was yesterday. You notice how we had this relative moist air mass over central Florida. That eventually shifted to the south and east here with time. And that's where we stand this is where we stand as of 2 o'clock this afternoon. We have a dry air mass to the north across north central Florida. And then we have this relative moist air mass over across portions of the Caribbean in the southwestern Atlantic. Well, what's going to start to happen is because our system is now moving over here, we also have an upper level anticyclone. And now this cold front is going to be, this quasi-stationary cold front is now going to be kind of retreating back to the north. What this means is that this very moist air mass to the south here across South Florida is now going to start to be kind of retrieved to the north. It's going to start to propagate northward, and we can see a very significant enhancement in the relative humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. These are, running within the 85 to 99% range across South Florida. And this is only going to drive up these rainfall amounts, and you can see a prolonged period of that occurring all the way through the next about 4 to 5 days. We have a pretty good stream of moisture being pumped in from the Caribbean into Florida. And this is going to drive up those rainfall amounts quite certainly. And as such, this is the Weather Prediction Center forecast from the NSUP over there in Washington, D.C. But these forecasted rain amounts are no joke. Across South Florida, portions of those areas could see upwards of about 7 to 10 inches of rain, with northern Florida, north central Florida from about Osceola to Orange County, including Metro Orlando, Melbourne, could see over about 4 to 5 inches of rain over the next 7 days. The further north you get, the less rain. This is kind of the denotation of where this cold front kind of propagates and how far it propagates northward. We can see a very distinct kind of setup here. We get this fire hose kind of setup across the Caribbean and in through Florida, and that's going to be very important for the rainfall totals as we go forth with time. Now, the one thing that's going to be kind of hindering much development with Invest Area 91L is the upper level wind field. And we can see that here in the 12Z GFS forecast is the 200 millibar winds. And we can see where our cold front is right now associated kind of with that jet streak in the atmosphere. And that's our cold front right there. The moisture confined south of it across South Florida right now, causing some flooding concerns. But what we see is in the Caribbean, we have an upper level anticyclone right now kind of, propagating to the west a little bit. We can see the flow, generally an anticyclonic flow in the atmosphere. So right now it's pretty good flow, but watch how this starts to change over the next several days. If we do get a storm that forms over the northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula, this is going to be a bit of a problem, because this upper level anticyclone isn't moving as fast as our disturbances. So if our storm is located here, you have anticyclonic flow, of course, to the south of it, and you also have another tropical upper tropospheric trough that's kind of diving in across here, and you can very clearly see that. But this actually is going to induce some south and southeasterly shear on 91L. Now, it's not incredibly strong shear at the moment, but this would be relatively probably, 10, 5, 10, maybe 15 knots of vertical wind shear across this region because that flow is not vertically stacked and aligned with this upper level anticyclone over here. So this area of relatively light flow is disturbed. It's kind of a ripple effect, and it's all because this is a relatively displaced upper level anticyclone. And again, this upper level low here, this tropical upper tropospheric trough, is going to be propagating off towards the west here over the next several days. And that is also going to help to kind of reinforce the southeasterly flow. And that's going to be reducing the maximum potential intensity of any storm that gets organized down in that region. Now, a lot is going to depend on where our storm forms, how quickly it forms, and ultimately if it stays over water or land, because there's considerable uncertainty. Now, we can see here a very different picture in terms of the upper level wind field out here. This is valid as of October 4th. This is 1 a.m. October 4th, 66 hours from now. A much different upper level wind pattern now that is being depicted on the GFS forecast. We can see that we do have this cold front here in the jet retrieval, kind of the jet max is located in through here. So this cold front is now lifting north, and that's going to bring Florida that increased risk of heavy rainfall. And you can very clearly see why that's the case. We have an upper level anticyclone that's located over Cuba right now, a pretty big upper level anticyclone located over Cuba and the Bahamas. And of course, this upper level ridge, this upper level anticyclone is it's a ridge of high pressure, but it's building the southwesterly flow. We're going to be getting southwesterly flow turning to southeasterly flow over the Gulf of Mexico, and that just kind of curves much back like that up back to the meeting point. But this is going to be pumping all of that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and also the Caribbean right into Florida. So this is going to be a rainfall threat, obviously, sort of the indirect impacts indirectly associated with the passage of 91L through the Yucatan Channel or the Yucatan Peninsula. But aside from that, the wind pattern here associated by or depicted by the GFS shows that any potential storm in this environment is going to heavily contend with 25 to 30 knots of vertical wind shear out of the southeasterly direction. And if this does manage to kind of survive in this area, and let's just say it goes over land, pops back out over water, you're going to now have south to southeast shear across this area, or south to southwest shear, and you're going to have about 30 to 35 knots of upper level wind across the Bay of Campeche. Very unsupportive for tropical cyclone formation, and that pattern kind of holds. We finally kind of get a break with an upper level anticyclone developing over the Gulf by day 5, and this allows for lighter flow, lighter return flow. You can see another trough digging in across here, but we also have another upper level low, so this is going to help to pinch off this area of light flow across here. So there's a lot of considerable uncertainty, and then you can see where our next system would be near Jamaica potentially on day 5. But again, even that has a relatively hard time organizing into anything substantial. So a lot of considerable uncertainties going forth with time regarding both of our tropical waves. Again, right now, the biggest concern over the next several days is going to be heavy rainfall, not only for the Yucatan Peninsula, but also for Florida and the western part of Cuba from the return flow pattern that we're going to be setting up across that region. But out ahead in time, we're also going to be watching this tropical wave with a 20% chance over the next 5 days. This is also going to be worth watching as the pattern seems to become a little bit more conducive over the next few days for development in the southwestern Caribbean. Where this goes with time remains to be the biggest question. And again, we're just going to have to wait and see with this type of overall pattern. Well, that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael Romali. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.